So my name is Zishan. I am a member of Youth Against Displacement. Thank you everyone for joining this panel that Youth Against Displacement is hosting together with the No More 24 pack. As you can see, still many people are joining in because this is a topic that many people are caring about. We touch on the YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. So this, whether you are, just hearing it here and there, or you have been in touch, with this trend in your field, this YIMBY movement is something that, people have been witnessing that's on the rise. While starting in San Francisco, this toxic thinking has become, contagion, infecting, our cities, across the country. Just here in New York City, where we organize, we have saw the anti-displacement movement, gaining momentum and actually gaining a lot of victories from fighting against the Amazon HQ in Queens, against Industry City, expansion in Brooklyn, to stopping the luxury towers in the Lower East Side of the Manhattan waterfront. Here, the real estate know, that they're losing. And so they think they had to pivot and taking inspiration from the San Francisco. The real estate really started pumping their money into these YIMBYs. And YIMBY is called Yes in My Backyard. What is YIMBY, right? And that, we're going to have this panel going to touch on, these very important questions. We're going to talk about it from the academic point of view, from the media and from the people's, organizing on the ground. So this panel will be very rich, in the content. And we have these amazing panelists, who are going to, share their experience and their presentation. So we're going to have first have Sarah Ngo Hamerling, who is a doctoral student at MIT, followed by Dean Preston, tenants' rights lawyer and former San Francisco supervisor. And then we're going to have Jihei Song from Youth Against Displacement. And then lastly, we'll have Kwang Hui from the No More 24 pack. So if you have any question during the panel, please put it in the chat and we will call on you afterwards. So let's first have Sarah.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Zishan, and thank you to everyone who's currently in attendance. Okay, so Zishan said I'm currently a doctoral candidate at MIT in the Department of Economics, and I'll be presenting about bad economics. I'll leave it to you whether that refers to what the YIMBYs commonly say or what they accuse us of, and in particular about the arguments around supply and demand that are commonly used or cited in arguments about whether or not the real estate industry should be given free rein to determine housing policy. So many of you have probably seen either on the internet or in person arguments of this nature, where when confronted with displacement advocates or merely with policy advocates who disagree with their preferred solutions, so-called YIMBYs will often make arguments such as they are, such as supply and demand is exactly how housing works, you dunces, you kids all need to log off and revisit Econ 101, this is the most economically illiterate thing I've ever heard, etc. And notably often these YIMBY advocates think it suffices merely to say supply and demand, as if that's an argument that makes itself, or that is so intuitive to all of us that we don't have to hear it established, let alone to have opportunity to disagree. And this strikes me as a professional economist as something like you're playing tic-tac-toe with someone, you have this state of the board, and your opponent at some point says, I've won. And you say, huh, I don't see it. And they say, well, X's and O's. And you say X's and O's, but that's not the state of the board. And they say, go back to tic-tac-toe school. And I think that's a little bit the state of the YIMBY argumentation at this moment. There's a very sloppy version of this, which is just stating these words as if they already connote an argument, but supply and demand in this sense are just like words that they're saying. They're noises that they make with their mouth. And I think in particular, there's been a lot of effort in the 20th century that far predates the current arguments over housing, stemming back to anti-communism, to the resurgence of a certain kind of libertarian economics during the Volcker and Reagan era, third wave kind of liberalism, to make this picture seem like it's common sense. But underlying it, what even is the argument? Is it true in practice? And is it even true in theory? And the answer from the perspective of formal economic theory is usually not. It's a very restrictive, the underlying model here is very restrictive. It comes with a lot of assumptions that are somewhat arcane and rarely describe the world. And nevertheless, this is cited as if it's somehow dispositive, like nothing more can be said. And I think this is a bit of an instance of Econ 101 syndrome, where these arguments make a lot of sense or go without saying for people who have taken between 1 and 5 economics classes. And if you've never taken an economics class before in your life, or you've taken a lot of them, this doesn't exactly hold water. So going through the question of like, why nevertheless has this gained so much purchase? And it is true that academic economists on the topic of housing, for the most part, do state kind of YIMBY-esque claims, even though in like the vast majority of every other market that's being studied, economists have permitted a little bit of movement away from these kinds of arguments. Why? There's a very strong taboo on research and teaching on rent control. It's still eroding. There's a lot of good research on this, and feel free to email me afterward if you'd like links. But nevertheless, this is the way that people have been educated, and so they continue to propagate it in turn. There's also a lot of money for studies in academic centers. You can guess where that comes from, as well as soft incentives of the profession that align behind continuing to promulgate this work. In general, I think if there's work that uses solely proprietary data, you should be very suspicious of this, because it comes often with data use agreements that, although they don't formally state that conclusions have to go a certain way, implicitly there is a certain amount of negotiation there. And lastly, just because, frankly, most academic economists are in the top 5% of the US income distribution and have not rented in decades, if ever. However, on the actual merits, in an econ PhD, we're often told all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the question is, useful to whom? Here, I think it goes without saying that arguments that say landlords should be given free rein to do whatever they want are useful for landlords and developers. And often I think the anti-YIMBY side says, can't we just leave it at that and just say this is propaganda and move on? In this talk, I'm going to try to suggest that YIMBY economics is bad economics on its own terms, and to try to equip you with the ability to make that argument. I think this is important, not because economics is so great on its own terms, and it might be useful for convincing certain people who read the New York Times say, but because thinking about what's wrong with these arguments is both good inoculation, and it also helps sharpen our own understanding that we've gained from our actual experience as renters. So just to go through the actual assumptions that are in the true economic argument here, I want to show that they don't exactly apply to the rental housing markets. So one might be if prices, and I'm going to use the example of the egg market where I think it's a little bit better. One is if egg prices fall, I will buy more eggs. There's a quantity adjustment. But if rents fall, I don't rent more apartments. I'm still staying in with my own. I just spend less of my income on it. Another might be once I buy eggs at the supermarket, I own them, but I don't own my apartment, right? There is a market where I can buy an apartment. That's not what I'm doing. I'm renting it for a certain amount of time. If I want to get into the egg business, I might hatch an egg, not the one I buy in the supermarket, into a new chicken. I might commission new egg sorting machines. I might commission new carton machines. I don't have to buy them from someone else. But in the real estate market, the amount of land, the underlying capital asset in real estate is fixed and non-reproducible, right? And that generates what's called economic rents. So if one egg company in the egg company world sells eggs at a markup, we might assume that someone else will make more eggs and egg prices will fall, which is to say egg markets might be competitive. But the real estate market is not competitive. Landlords do in fact make profits. And it's not to say that the standard economic models can't be adapted for these circumstances, but you certainly don't get them for free. And if you're going to do that work of adaptation, you might as well kind of start from a place that's a little more realistic. Just as a case study, in New York City during COVID, nominal median rents hit record levels in 2022, to the point that even 20% of new apartment leases were concluded with bidding wars, which is crazy. You expect that in buying a house, different potential buyers might bid up. In a rental market, that's insane. But at this, which suggests a very, very tight market, at the same time, New York City lost 5.3% of its population. So this is a case in which demand fell relative to supply, but rents continued to go up, or in real terms, at least did not fall. I think this is a case study that should be extremely challenging to say, like the YIMBY world, in which they assume that pro tanto, you increase quantity, you increase supply, price falls. Here's a case in which demand fell and price did not fall. Just going through a series of so-called YIMBY arguments, which I'm going to refer to as folktales. One is, if regulations were lifted, more apartments must come to market. This is because the YIMBYs assume that the reason why quantity is too low and price is too high is that the government restricts quantity. Like if the landlords, they would really love to bring more units to market, but the government won't let them. So removing zoning restrictions, fire code, rent control, tenants protections, all of these things that were won at great cost during the 20th century would just make the market more efficient. But the thing is, a profit maximizing landlord, as a result of just standard economic theory, will always, if it can, restrict quantity in order to support a higher price, even or especially if it's left to its own devices. This is the standard theory of a classical monopolist. What does a monopolist do? It limits quantity and restricts supply in order to maintain a higher price. And in fact, we do see that landlords warehouse units. The vacancy rates are a little bit misdescribed in New York City, which I can talk about later, but they should be a little bit higher. And collusion is also very well documented in the rental housing industry, either through algorithmic collusion, through RealPage, or informally. Next, the YIMBYs think that high rents can cause, but cannot be caused by high asset prices. This is the little tweet that suggested that it's extremely economically illiterate to suggest that landlords might like to post capital gains. Whereas in reality, a landlord's decision about how much rental housing to bring to market and how to charge it are not determined solely by the market for units of rental housing, right? It's about the underlying capital market. So the landlord is making a choice. Do I use my money to buy this apartment building, or do I go buy some stocks, some bonds, some other asset class instead? The rate of return, which is equal to the dividends, in this case, rents, plus capital gains, which is the amount of price appreciation you get merely by owning the asset, has to be equal across different asset categories. Like if it were lower in real estate than say in stocks, I would just buy stocks. So if the return on capital goes up for stocks or crypto or whatever else, it also has to go up in the case of rental housing, right? And so that part of that can come purely through the price gain. Part of that comes through dividends, which in this case means rents. So if like the return on stocks or the returns on capital in general is high, the return on real estate assets also has to be high, and some of that's going to come from rents. This is particularly true because there's a lot of US policy devoted to maintaining high real estate prices, as in Hong Kong, but unlike Japan, notably Hong Kong also has high rents, whereas Japan doesn't. And also one might expect there to be, speculation in the real estate industry, which would further exacerbate this. Next, the YIMBYs often state that if more apartments are built by the market, rents must fall, just like quantity increases. So by supply demand, price falls. But many of us have had the experience of a new luxury tower coming up and then prices in the surrounding neighborhood rising and not falling. And often there are arguments about this that have to do with gentrification or subtle sociological claims, but there's a very concrete economic reason for this, which is that suppose some other landlord who now has the option due to rezoning to build higher doesn't in fact build higher. They just stay, they could build at 12, they stay at 10. Well, if they're staying at 10, it must be because it's worth it for them, right? This is like a standard economic assumption that landlords, economic agents, are profit maximizing. So they must be at least indifferent between what they get from rebuilding and taking more tenants and what they get from staying. The only way they can be indifferent is if they raise rents. So this is a statement that it's like, so clearly when zoning restrictions are lifted, sure, some new towers will be built. Surely other ones will not, and people will stay the same. But in those existing buildings, rents have to rise. Next, we often hear that rents are based on landlords' costs, like, underlying this is the price of mortgages, the prices of building the apartment buildings, the prices of maintenance, et cetera. But actually, in reality, right, like a tale as old as wage labor has existed is that you get a raise, but then your rent goes up by at least that amount. And that phenomenon in and of itself is incompatible with the standard kind of YIMBY argument about supply and demand, in which if the market is competitive and rents are competitively priced, it should be based on landlords' costs. But why does this nevertheless happen, right? Like I think we've all had the experience of getting a raise and then it gets immediately eaten by rents. And this is because of landlords' enormous bargaining power over renters. It implies that no matter what interventions are made, unless the landlord is somehow restricted in how they can set the terms of trade, so for instance, you fix rents, or tenants gain the power to set the terms themselves, the landlord can extract the entire surplus. If someone says, if this isn't economics, like these words don't sound very economic, power, surplus extraction, I don't know about that, you can refer them, by the way, to the 2007 and 2016 Nobel Prizes in economic science. Lastly, I think people often state that free market policies might help transplant middle or high income earners or market rate tenants, even if they hurt incumbents or low earners or stabilized tenants. And sometimes, people might even get involved in anti-displacement activism because they feel that, yes, the YIMBY policies help them, but they want to be good neighbors or something like that. But actually, if you look carefully at the underlying economic models, you'll note that one of the other properties of them is something called marginalism, which undergirds all contemporary neoclassical economics, which is that prices are determined by the marginal agent who's indifferent between, say, like performing a particular economic act, like buying something, and also either buying something else or refraining. And in such a world, if holding down rents for the people who pay, then holding down rents for the people who pay the least also anchors rents down for people who pay more, because someone is on the margin between staying in a stabilized unit and going on the market rate market. And I think this is like a strong reason why the interests of all tenants, regardless of incumbency, stabilization, earning potential, or ability to pay for willingness to pay for apartments, often coincide to a greater extent that is commonly given in YIMBY arguments, or how people have internalized them. So just as a takeaway, the YIMBYs are really hoping that you won't think too carefully about what they're saying. And when they say in the tic-tac-toe game, I'm right because of X's and O's, you'll just stop playing. Because if you do, you'll draw very different conclusions. One is that apartments are just not eggs. Unclear if eggs are eggs in this sense. But that a supply shortage can happen even without restrictive laws, just by dint of landlords' profit maximization, which causes them to restrict supply. That record high capital returns in stock markets, even in unrelated asset markets, can mean record high rents. That rezoning can actually raise rents in a neighborhood and can definitely raise profits. That keeping rents lower for some tenants will often keep them lower for all. And that unless landlords are made somehow to cede power over the terms of trade, whether through legislation or through tenants organizing or through something else, this won't get better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to add that Sarah is a very passionate student, with her work, exposing the YIMBYs' lies and the interests that they represent. And also, she's very close to the community. So she's a very rare student, I would have to say, especially in the academic world that heavily rely on the funding, from the super rich and the big developers. So next, we'll have Dean Preston, former San Francisco supervisor, who had been at the forefront fighting the YIMBY trend over there, and who will provide us with many valuable lessons. Dean.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate the invitation to be with you. And Sarah, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. And I'm sure that you get a lot of grief for so clearly articulating these economic principles in a landscape that often wants to operate totally on self-serving sound bites, not on actual sound economic theory. So my name is Dean Preston, as was mentioned. Just really briefly, some of my background. I'm a tenant rights attorney, been fighting for tenant rights and affordable housing for 25 years in San Francisco. I was the founder of Tenants Together, which is the only statewide tenant rights organization here, and have passed rent control laws, created the right to counsel in San Francisco, taxed the rich to fund the largest rent relief program locally in U.S. history here in San Francisco, banned evictions during the pandemic, and did a big tax on real estate transfers, high-end real estate transfers, to generate hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing. And until January, I served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors as an elected representative of District 5, and have been dealing with a lot of YIMBY disinformation and nonsense for the better part of a decade. So glad to share it, and I will try to keep it brief, but I did want to talk and was asked to talk a little bit about the origins of this so-called movement of YIMBY here in San Francisco, and some of the sort of propaganda side of how they cloak what is fundamentally a trickle-down economics theory applied to housing in the language of housing justice and social justice and racial justice, which is, I guess, ironic is probably the nicest way to say it. But just so San Francisco, as has been said, is the birthplace of the YIMBY movement. A woman by the name of Sonia Traus, who moved out here, moved into the Bay Area, and began a organization that was called at the time, probably very appropriately, the acronym was BARF, BARF, the Bay Area Renters Federation. And that was the start of YIMBY in San Francisco. And this was, and I think it says a lot about this movement. Uh, this was a total AstroTurf renters, quote unquote, renters organization that provided no services whatsoever to any tenant. I don't think they ever once counseled the tenant on anything, and advocated for not one pro-tenant policy in the Bay Area, and did no work whatsoever with any existing tenants union, tenant group, or affordable housing organization. But they were the self-declared Bay Area Renters Federation that received a huge amount of money from big tech uh, uh, billionaires, millionaires here in the Bay Area. Um, and this group advocated, pushed against just cause for eviction protections, uh, was against any inclusionary housing requirements that developers provide affordable units when they're developing market rate housing. And they were really in lockstep with private developers, corporate landlords, and the real estate lobby of the Bay Area. They were also very clearly and explicitly, or I guess not so explicitly, but they were clearly an anti-progressive political operation, saying in one of their early PowerPoints that one of their objectives was to disrupt the alliance, the pro-rent control alliance between homeowners and renters organizations that existed in San Francisco. So they were political from the start, and it has seemed I've often characterized them as more of a anti-progressive political movement than anything to do with actual housing. Um, when they're often criticized along the way for their focus on luxury housing. I think they claim all the time to be in favor of all housing, yet all their work seems to center on the market rate housing side of things, not on creating or supporting public housing, subsidized housing, or any form of social housing. Um, the the YIMBYs early on took um, I think, compelling issue in some ways, a very real phenomenon, which was exclusionary zoning, particularly in wealthier suburbs in California, places like Palo Alto, and places that were more suburban and were intentionally zoned just for single-family homes so that they could exclude apartment buildings. That's a real issue that affordable housing advocates have been fighting at the state level in California against the Realtors Association for decades. And so that was a lot of their framing was against and continues to be against exclusionary zoning laws. But they used that issue really as a club to pound on low-income communities in expensive urban centers. And so you see the logic of telling a suburban white community that you should have apartment buildings, which is a good thing probably, but taking that and telling a low-income Black community or low-income Chinatown area or others in San Francisco that those principles apply to you, right? And that we should be able to build unlimited luxury housing in your neighborhoods. The I was pretty shocked early on with this organization that they just came right out and said they were opposed. For example, there was a consensus other than the real estate industry in support of inclusionary housing, in support of saying developers should have to build 10, 20, 25% affordable when they're building. They even opposed that. So they have a pretty extreme view. In San Francisco over the years, they have opposed community land trusts, opposed vacancy taxes. They've come out very strongly against efforts at the highest priority for tenant groups, which has been to repeal our state law known as Costa-Hawkins, which severely limits rent control at the local level. So one of the top priorities of the tenant movement in California has been to repeal that state ban on certain forms of rent control. The YIMBYs have opposed that through their organization, California YIMBY. They have opposed tenant other tenant rights laws at the state level have never lifted a finger to pressure their elected officials, the YIMBY elected officials, who have blocked affordable housing, who have opposed taxes to fund affordable housing, and who have actually refused to spend affordable housing money on affordable housing. Like all those things, which if a group was in fact, quote, pro-housing, as they've declared themselves to be, they would be fighting for those things. In San Francisco, what we see, and in California more broadly, is that the movement is not and has never been about affordable housing. I do want to say, I think there are people within the YIMBY movement who do believe in affordable housing. A lot of them are ex-YIMBYs. I know a lot of people who started out in this movement because they want to oppose exclusionary housing. They want to build apartments in wealthy white suburbs. They want to diversify communities. They want more density. Like those are things that I think a lot of progressives share, but when they get involved with YIMBY, at least in California, and I believe in other places, they see that it's much more of a pro-gentrification, anti-poor, not just white-led, but almost exclusively white movement that is constantly in opposition to and fighting with tenants unions and community organizations in communities of color. They are always on the other side and always fully aligned with the real estate industry. We've seen some absolutely absurd examples in San Francisco. I don't have time to go into them. I'm happy to answer any questions. I will just point to one. There was a formerly black neighborhood in my district that has been so gentrified that it is now not a majority black neighborhood anymore. As part of a freeway that was torn down there, a site of land was promised for affordable housing nearly 20 years ago. When I was in office, we were set to make good on that, had lined up some funding, and were opposed by one of the YIMBY groups here called Grow SF and their former employees, who were very upset that there was going to be affordable housing on this city-owned lot that was dedicated for housing for low-income families that serves right now as an outdoor luxury gym. And the YIMBYs of that neighborhood actually opposed having affordable housing on a city-owned affordable housing site, with one of the prominent local YIMBY leaders being quoted in the papers complaining that it might cast shadows on a nearby park. So all the stuff they throw at others in San Francisco is usually more of a confession than anything, and that site has certainly really shown that. I I will say that the part of the success of the movement has been putting its oversimplification, as I think Sarah's comments really get at some basic concepts. It's fundamentally quite similar to like an all lives matter approach when it comes to housing, where they are using language that sounds like it benefits everyone, when in fact they're focused on delivering housing for those at the top, and a trickle down theory. And they have, I think, pulled off a pretty effective propaganda campaign around this. I think Sarah's point is correct around diagnosing why some of the economists are on board. I would say it definitely extends to the media in San Francisco. The corporate media, particularly San Francisco Chronicle, share the perspectives, are primarily concerned with the housing options for people who earn, a couple $100,000 a year, not with those who, are working retail and struggling to stay in San Francisco. So I think there is absolutely a bias, not just in academia, but in media as well, that really amplified this framing that YIMBYs put forward. I think fundamentally, and I'm happy to discuss more once we're in Q&A, and I will wrap up here. But I do just want to say, I think fundamentally you can get very bogged down in the weeds of some of the policies and debates, and I find in debating with YIMBYs, which I did far more than I recommend it used to do, and it's just whenever you win an argument, they just move the goalposts. I mean, there's never a moment in time when someone says, "Oh yeah," and but I think fundamentally the question is with all these housing proposals is who's the housing for, right? The nonsense of pro-housing, anti-housing is just kind of silly. Like the reality is like, I think there are some of us who prioritize making sure low income and working class people can afford to live in expensive cities. And then there are others who are far more focused on trying to build luxury housing. I think the trickle down notions have been largely disproven. And I do think there are moments of clarity where that comes through. And, just recently, last year, actually, one of the YIMBY leaders here at a planning commission hearing, testified quite clearly that only when prices go up will there be more development. He was trying to explain why there wasn't more development here. So literally, you have the head of YIMBY explaining that it's only when housing is totally unaffordable that the private market will build it. So it's left a lot of us questioning if it's even about the trickle-down economics in building or whether it's just about inflating land prices by rezoning for housing, a lot of which will never be built, but there'll be a lot of profits through the rezonings. So I will leave it at that, and thank you again for having me on. Looking forward to the rest of our discussion.
Thank you, Dean, for sharing your experience. It's good to have you here, and I think you touched a lot of important points and a lot of similarities of what we see here in New York City. I think especially how they also try to put out these so-called pro-housing, as if all of us who try to protect the affordable housing become the anti-housing, or find different ways to try to divide our communities, right? So next we have Ji-Hae Song from Youth Against Displacement, as we sharing our experience organizing on the ground as young people, how we fight against this YIMBY trend.
So hi everyone. Thank you again everyone for joining. It's so exciting to see so many folks here. My name is Ji-Hae. I'm speaking on behalf of Youth Against Displacement. Hopefully we'll try to share some thoughts on the question that I know was on everyone's mind, which is how do we fight these people? How do we stop them, right? So YAD, we're a group of young people and the young at heart, we like to say, that are fighting against displacement in New York City, especially based in Chinatown and the Lower East Side. And we've seen that the YIMBY logic is one that really takes advantage and enlarges the existing divisions that developers have been pushing forever between so-called young people, whether they be students, artists, people moving to the city, people moving into the neighborhood, and the community, which is the so-called long-term residents, the existing residents, right? And our perspective at YAD is that we're the same thing. Young people in the community, we are the same thing. And to fight the YIMBYs, we need to expose these divisions as tools of developers and actually unite together young people with the rest of the community through fighting displacement together. So at YAD, we recently started what we like to call the war on YIMBYs, because we want to expose, these people for the developer shills that they are and not let them give the rest of us young people a bad reputation and further these divisions and try to isolate us from the rest of our community. So developers, they've always been, trying to say, we've all heard this, right? That young people are separate from the community, that we're gentrifiers, that we cause displacement. Developers love this because it redirects the blame for displacement from themselves, the developers and all the politicians they buy off. Because the truth of the matter is right, most young people, we can't afford the rent here in New York City. We live with 2 to 3 other, 5 other sometimes roommates to make the rent. And we're also suffering from displacement in the same way as the rest of our neighbors are also suffering from displacement. But the YIMBYs are actually, they're young people that have become gentrifiers because they're young people that stand with developers, make that choice to do so, right? And promote displacement. The YIMBYs see developers as their friends, right? Build, build, build. And in turn, they see the community as their enemy because the community is usually much smarter, right, than young people on the internet. And the community knows that luxury development causes displacement. It causes rents to go up. And so I think to everyone here, right, this is actually very good for us, right? Because it shows that we can learn from our community. We can come together and unite together, and that there are actually more of us that see through this nonsense, right, than the actual YIMBYs. And so when the YIMBYs like first really got going in New York City, we were able to like immediately recognize that it was stupid because we had come together with our larger community in this anti-displacement fight. And at this point, we've actually already had some victories against the YIMBYs. So YAD, for some context, YAD is part of a coalition of residents, workers, even small business owners, other family members, right, that have been fighting back for many years against displacement. And particularly, we've been fighting back against this landlord who's the biggest landlord in Chinatown. His name is Jonathan Chu, and he basically just wants to turn Chinatown into like a Chinese themed theme park for rich people, like just a bunch of fancy hotels and fancy museums and fancy restaurants, right? Nothing really for the community. And so in 2021, the city government upzoned several of his properties, so meaning that they increased his ability to build, they increased his property values, he's now going to make so much more money as part of an upzoning of Soho, which is the whiter, wealthier neighborhood that's right next to Chinatown. And with this rezoning, this was really the first time that the city used the YIMBY logic, their playbook, their messaging to push through this rezoning. So, for many years, the city's basically kind of says something like this, which is like, we know, for many years we've been rezoning communities of color, communities, in more low-income areas. We understand that. We're sorry. It's time for us to do the racial justice rezoning. So we're gonna upzone the white people. And I kid you not, our deputy mayor of housing, who is, I believe, the head of some think tank that writes a lot about pro-YIMBY academics, she literally said that this rezoning of Soho was going to be in honor of George Floyd, and that the Soho residents that opposed the rezoning were racist and were NIMBYs. And it's ridiculous. I really can't stress how ridiculous that is. Is that essentially, in the name of fighting racism, and this is, why it was so clear. In the name of fighting racism, the city was giving the biggest landlord in Chinatown more power and money to destroy our community. The Soho rezoning, like, outstandingly benefited Jonathan Chu, and so it was very clear, right, that this was how the YIMBYs were operating. And our coalition came together with the white people in Soho, most of whom are actually not that rich and wouldn't have been able to afford the higher rents and property taxes that upzoning would have caused. And we opposed the Soho rezoning. In doing so, we actually, we exposed the YIMBYs for supporting the displacement of Chinatown and Soho, and we united our two communities, our two neighborhoods together against the developers. So, unfortunately, at the time, we were not able to stop the rezoning of Soho, but because we had united that community together through that struggle, as well as through other anti-displacement struggles that, follow very similar lines of overcoming divisions, whether racial or other racial immigration, whatnot, that the city has been trying to push. We overcame those divisions and we elected a council member here in Lower Manhattan that actually stands up to big real estate, with the Dean Preston of the East, if you will. His name is Christopher Marte. And Chris Marte very quickly became the #1 enemy of YIMBYs because, he did things like stand with us to stop luxury towers from being built in low-income neighborhoods. And he supported the creation of 100% truly affordable housing, like affordable to the people that live here, affordable, which is not what the city means when they say affordable. And so the YIMBYs are now spending ridiculous amounts of money to try and get rid of him this election, this June. And we want to invite, on behalf of YAD, I'd like to invite everyone here joining us today to join us in making sure that Chris Marte actually wins really big this year. Because if he wins really big, it'll be a huge blow to the YIMBYs. It'll make them so upset because they're really spending a lot of time and money to get rid of him. And at the same time, it'll show all these developers and politicians that are currently trotting along to the YIMBY playbook, that our communities see through their BS, and we're fighting back against them, and we are going to continue winning in our victories against them. And I also want to say, I think that this victory that we had in our community, to get Chris elected in 2021 and 2023 and our soon to be victory again in 2025. It can also be a really good example to other communities, not just in New York City, but across the whole country, right? Because it shows that we can actually beat the YIMBYs, when we can fight displacement, when we overcome these divisions that developers have been cooking up all these years to try to divide us. And I think we're here, in Lower Manhattan, which is like the most luxury developed place maybe in the United States. And the developers, they're currently spending like all this money to get rid of us, get rid of Chris. And the fact that I think they can't do it is, I hope, very inspiring to other people. So yeah, to say, I think if we can do it here, I really hope that, we're right across the street from Wall Street, literally. So if we can do it here, and beat the YIMBYs, then I think that's a really good sign for other communities elsewhere across the city, across the country, that we can do the same. So yeah, that's a little bit shorter, I hope, than not too long presentation. But I just want to wrap up. I'll let people know, if there's anyone that is, in our New York City area, YAD is going to be having a press conference this Thursday at 12 noon in Chinatown, in New York City, Chinatown. It'll be at Canal and Forsyth. And we're going to push for Chris Marte's reelection with this anti-displacement agenda of fighting YIMBYs. And so please join us either at the press conference, and also to flyer in the coming weeks. There's about a week and a half left before the election. And if you can't come in person, please still join us in fighting the war on YIMBYs. You can follow YAD on Instagram. I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, join us in isolating the YIMBYs and calling them out and uniting with our communities to fight them on the ground as well. So we're really excited to connect with all of you and continue learning from each other and growing our movement together. So thank you.
Thank you, Jihei, for your very encouraging word and the latest update of the fights in the New York City against the YIMBY trend. So the last speaker on the panel will be Kwang Hui, representing the No More 24 pack. Kwang?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Well, let me make mine very quick, and so this way we have more time for Q&A. As Sarah said before, I think her analysis exposed that the supply side filtering down approach proposed by the YIMBY does not produce more affordable housing, certainly does not prevent any displacement. In fact, really what it is nothing more than a disguise and a giveaway to developers. And Dean shared his experience firsthand, right? Literally at ground zero when YIMBY got started, again showing how not only what it has actually done, YIMBY, is it actually divides the community and speeds up displacement. Certainly nothing about promoting more inclusive, equitable housing, but really more just exclusionary, expensive housing. And the hopeful thing is that, as Jean Tay sort of mentioned, with the Youth Against Displacement, they are exposing, countering the lies, and they are uniting the community, particularly across racial lines, across generational lines. Really sort of effort uniting the community to fight back. As Jean sort of mentioned already, I think a complementary part of our strategy is to exercise and retake our political power, particularly in the electoral arena. First, by helping elected officials who want to be leaders in this common people's effort to protect our communities and our families. And also second is by holding accountable those politicians who want the opposite. And this is where sort of the No More 24 pack comes in. As Chiney mentioned, I think we have been working very hard, very closely with Chris Monte, City Council member of District 1, helping him not only helping him with his election and re-election, but also helping him to become the Speaker of the City Council. And so we are looking for support, both in terms of volunteers as well as financial support. We are looking to raise money to not only to help Chris win his re-election, but also to become speakers of the city council. At the same time, we also been identifying and endorsing other city council members here in New York City that can to form a coalition that will support the fight against displacement. So I know that's one of the slides later. We'll have a QR code that kind of show you more information about the No More 24 PAC, as well as a opportunity for you to volunteer and also to help contribute to the financially to the effort. So with this, I want to end right here, Sejan, so that this way we open up more time for Q&A for everyone.
All right, thank you, Kwang, for the information and some of the next steps that people can take, wherever you are, across the country. So in our just a reminder that if you have questions, please type it in the chat, and we'll try to get to you. And I see already a lot of the comments in the chat. And also, when the people sign up, many people also raise questions. And I would like to sum up, all the questions. I think basically they can be summed up into two questions. I will put these questions to the panelists. So the first question is, how do we combat the YIMBY narrative, especially given that they are, under the guise of this social justice, fighting racism, that people, able to see through as bullshit, but still find it very hard to speak out, against that. And the second question, of course, is, how to organize against them. So, the panelists, feel free to answer one or both of the questions. So any of you want to take the first step? Dean?
I'll jump in. Yeah, sure. So in terms of how to counter them and to win, I think it's important to have a little perspective on like how often they've lost. I think again, they've been very widely adopted by economists, by corporate media, but in terms of like the actual battles, like in San Francisco, year after year after year they ran and their ideas were pretty unpopular and they could not win elected office. Like the person I mentioned who founded YIMBYs, Sonia Traus, ran for office herself, got clobbered. Like it's not, luxury towers are not like some wildly popular thing anywhere. I think what has shifted though is in the you used to, at least in San Francisco, you used to not be able to win races around just like digital campaigns, right? And I think the power of digital has shifted a bit in our local elections, and combined with the normalization of complete disinformation. And so I think in terms of combating them, very important, number one, to keep things really simple. I think where we who are challenging YIMBYs often lose some of these battles is by getting too in the weeds and too focused on being right and not challenging these kind of very simplistic, pro-housing, housing at all levels, all these kind of attractive phrasing of what's fundamentally a gentrification, an anti-progressive and anti-community movement. So I think meeting that with some very simple messaging is really important, and not underestimating the extent of the disinformation that they will invest with tech and real estate money, unlimited amounts of money into. So I think in retrospect, for me, having just battled in a race with some of this and having had several elections now, some we've won, some we've lost, right, is that some of the stuff that at the outset seems so absolutely ridiculous that you just think nobody's going to believe it, you do have to counter. And that's been an ongoing, it's always a question of like, do you swat down the ridiculous stuff the other side's saying, or do you just stick to your messaging. And I do think sometimes, some of us in San Francisco have paid a price for just letting just the whole campaign, like against me was just like this wild concoction of disinformation they made up that they said I was a landlord. I've never been a landlord in my life. They said my wife was a landlord. She'd never been a landlord. They said I blocked 30,000 units of housing. I haven't blocked any housing. It's like literally just all made up. And they went at some of our strengths, right? And just did kind of like for those who, like they just like would spread the exact out like it was total disinformation. And so I think, a decade ago, 5 years ago, there was less of an appetite for that. I do think we're in a world now where if you have unlimited money behind these folks and they're willing to spread complete disinformation, that you can't dismiss it. So that would be, my advice would be like strong, super simple messaging, grassroots, door knocking and campaigns to get the message out, and then not taking for granted that the media or others are going to fact check them in any way, and you do have to rebut the disinformation they put out.
Thank you, Dean. Any other panelists want to take up the questions?
Yeah, just very briefly. So the conversations I've had with people who are often kind of well-meaning, they're not necessarily shills for landlords, but they're like, say, either DSA adjacent or just, habitual New York Times readers who got really taken in by this stuff. I just wanted to absolutely echo what Dean said about picking a very straightforward message. And also, I think grounding it back in people's just like eyes and ears of what they see in the market and affirming that that is actually, if they trot out these kind of very abstract economic claims that like, ultimately we're trying to describe the world and we can all see with our eyes, a luxury tower gets built and then rents rise in the surrounding neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. Or a person gets a raise and then their rents go up. Or, vacancy rates are really like these towers went up around Central Park and they're really vacant. Or people invest in real estate because they want to make a return, not because, they're trying to clear supply and demand. And I think when this gets ground back, like anchored back in things people can see, maybe things that they've experienced on the market, like as renters of trying to find apartments in, the disaster area of the New York City rental housing market, I think that can often put pressure on people for saying, oh, this isn't actually matching what I've been told by the YIMBYs. This isn't matching the supply side argument. And that'll more so than say like remembering or memorizing like rejoinders, just regrounding it in those kind of common sense facts can show something, what's hollow about the YIMBY argument, and can help people find their way back to, an accurate understanding of the world around them and in turn ground political action.
Cool. Jihye?
Yeah, I'll also just say briefly, yeah, as I think several of the other panelists touched on, if a YIMBY came out and kind of said what they actually thought to anyone on the street, they would probably get hit or at the very minimum like not listened to, right? I think we can be very confident that their actual talking points and arguments are heard to be ridiculous by our neighbors, by our community members. And I think the real power of YIMBYs is that they're, I think, able to like play on an existing fractures and try to increase those fractures that have caused a situation where even though like many people know that luxury towers are bad, like somehow we can't do anything about them, right? Or these elected officials can come out and say things that we know to be untrue, and yet it feels like they still keep getting elected. And so I think that's why it's like we found it, yeah, like it is really important. Like more often than not, I think that a lot of kind of leftist like organizing tends to shoot itself in their own foot by isolating themselves, whether that be as like communities of young people or by race or by gender or by neighborhood or I mean, we even have, yeah, we hear all the time the people that were advocating for luxury towers to be built said that you couldn't have an opinion on it if you weren't from that same block. It's like and I think these things like we hear them all the time. So I think it's natural that we start to believe them ourselves. And so that's, I think, the really important work that we should be doing is going out, coming together with our communities, embracing our communities, like really being very sharp and identifying who is dividing us and to what purpose. And the more I think that we can bring people together to see that our real enemy are these developers, are all the politicians they're buying off, then that's actually going to be the strength that gives us that's where we're going to get the strength to fight these YIMBYs. So.
Thank you, Jihei. Thank you. I want to go to the next question, which is a very interesting one. It comes from Brian. He asks, how do we win back or relate to progressive politicians who have been captured by the YIMBYs?
May I say a couple of things on that? I think sometimes, that's a very good question to ask, because I think sometimes, kind of like Jin said, we kind of shoot ourselves our own feet. A lot of time I think folks in the progressive side kind of give that up, kind of say, hey, we're not going to get ourselves dirty by getting involved in electoral politics. Look, I have no illusion about electoral politics, but I think sometimes we give that up too easily. I would say we make it too cheap for let's say the real estate industry to buy politicians, because we just kind of relinquish that front. And if you look at what's happening around us now, like with the current administration, the White House, they're very aware of the power of the government and the importance of controlling politicians. And I think that's why it's so important that we do need to support politicians that do want to be to take part, to be a leader in this effort to fight against displacement, to fight for the welfare of common people. And also we need to hold those accountable who are not, who are doing the opposite. And I think that is the only way you could have those type of politicians that can, because at the end of the day, they try to win elections, right? And so if we don't somehow get involved, we don't try to expose the facts, we don't make some effort to support the ones that actually try to do the right thing, then you basically just give up that whole entire front. And if you look at this as a battle, it's a war to win, you really can't afford to simply say, okay, I'm just going to hold protests in the street, but I'm not going to do anything on the electoral side. I think that's counterproductive. And we need to figure out how to do it. Again, not to say that we should looking for a savior, some politician comes along and the days are saved. Nothing like that. But this is looking at we're taking and exercising our political power in the in the electoral arena as well.
I think Kwang, you touched something very good, and I think see if other panelists want to add on to that, because I think usually there's this concern, right? Okay, you elect so and so who say very nice things, and then when it comes to power, then what they say is a nice thing, sometimes they got twisted, or those who people look up to, right, as so-called progressive, right, and then they started to espouse these YIMBY talking points.
Right.
And then disappoint many people. So want to see other panelists how you what's your thoughts regarding this question about how to win back or relate to these progressive politicians who seem to be captured by the YIMBYs.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll say, I think, to the two parts of that, right, which is how do we make sure that they don't sell us out once they're elected, and then the second part is, okay, they've sold us out, like what can we do? So to the first part, I think that's why, like, YAD and the coalition, for example, with Chris Marte, like we really do our best to build a vibrant anti-displacement movement that goes beyond just the campaign season, although we do think that is very important. And because I think we know, like, at the end of the day, there's always going to be pressure from the developers to define what is possible, as well as, offer money, right? And so the only way we can, I think not just make Chris Marte accountable, but I think more like actually in a more positive way, support him to actually do what we want to do is when our community is organized and strong enough to beat back those developers, right? Like Chris Marte can't do a single thing to support the community if the community wasn't behind him. We have had other elected officials in New York City that did have very, I think, also stood up to developers. In Harlem, we had a council member that also stood up to a really bad luxury development project, and but without like a really strong, robust community united behind her and fighting with her for those things. Not to say that it wasn't there in some part, but she was destroyed by developers and she lost her election. Or she stepped back, right? So to me, that was like a very clear example, just personally, I live in Harlem, that the power that we have really comes from us, and when we do that, like we can push our electeds. And so the second part, I think, what we want to do, because yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone's following the New York City mayoral race. It's a little disappointing how many of them are YIMBYs. And even the so-called progressives. But I think that, by using Chris Marte as an example of someone whose campaign is very much defined as being against displacement, putting people first, fighting luxury development, fighting YIMBYs, supporting real low-income housing, like putting that campaign, making that campaign really big, I think sends a message to all these other progressives too, where they're like, okay, this is very serious. This community is very serious. I should be really worried about the people in my community doing the same thing and getting me out and replacing me with a Chris Marte of their own, right? So I think that's also how we can bring the elected officials that are currently selling out, or get rid of them and bring in new ones, right?
Dean?
Yeah, I think I really agree that it's about building that political power more so than it is about some magic policy that you can wave at, someone who is, was elected as a progressive and then moves more in the YIMBY direction. I think what I would add, and again, and some of my experience mostly in San Francisco and California more broadly, but I would question the premise of this supposed progressive YIMBY politician. I just don't know like I'm looking at the different species of, where people are. And I don't know where that thing is in the wild, because in San Francisco and in California, I know they try to create this thing. I mean, this was the whole invention of YIMBY, right? Was corporate landlords and developers just putting forward, like attacking progressives for being too left and all that kind of stuff. Like people hated them. And so like in big cities like San Francisco, they would lose every election. So they came up with this YIMBY thing, which is like a new face that's supposedly progressive, right? That, like I said before, embraced all the progressive and the sort of racial justice, like talking points, while advancing policies that were the exact opposite of that. I think there are progressive people who get drawn into the YIMBY movement and who can be reasoned with and who may favor density, for example, but want strong, anti-displacement provisions and want to invest in public housing. Those folks absolutely exist. Like I said, a lot of them leave YIMBY in California once they discover more about that org. But I wouldn't say there are a lot of politicians like that. I think for a politician who is going to favor corporate developers, landlords, Realtors Association, attack tenant protections, undermine rent control. I just that this is so counter to what being a progressive is. I just don't see a lot of those people, and I think the ones who use that label, who advance these YIMBY policies but claim to be progressive, they usually know better, and they're more careerists, and they are making a calculation that the money that's flowing in from the real estate industry and from the tech industry behind their campaigns is more important than what they know in their core. And I've seen this. I've seen this with people I've served with. I've seen people who absolutely know better and then are at a different stage in their career, and suddenly their views have completely shifted on this issue, and yet they're still trying to call themselves progressives. Are they progressive on certain issues? Sure, right? But it's a pretty damn big issue, especially if you represent a big city, right? It's not like just I'm progressive except for this one little thing. It's like this is land use policy and who gets to live in our cities and whether it's only for a playground for rich people, right? And it's like I just so I don't really I would be very interested to talk to someone who seriously maintains, at least in San Francisco or California, that they're progressive and yet is full-throated YIMBY, because I think they're pretty incompatible with each other.
Thank you, Dean. Sarah, do you have anything to add to the question? Okay, so the next question, I think more specifically to Dean. This is from Janine, who asks more historical detail about how pro-housing advocates first push for zoning reform.
Well, I'll start as I did with the last one. Just to, thank you for the question. I will challenge the use of pro-housing advocates because I think that I assume most of you are pro-housing and would love nothing more than abundant, affordable housing, not trickle-down housing policy. And so you're probably very pro-housing. I joke, but I mean I've challenged reporters on this very thing. About 4 or 5 years ago, they all started using the word pro-housing. It was just a YIMBY talking point. And I asked some of the reporters I know really well, I said, you've covered affordable housing groups for 20, 30 years, groups in San Francisco like the Council of Community Housing Organizations, leading advocates for affordable housing. You've never once used the term pro-housing to describe them. These are people who spent their entire careers building affordable housing for working class people in San Francisco. So I do, I always push back on the use of pro-housing, but I think the push on zoning reform was a foundational thing for YIMBY and has continued to be. It, I what's strange has been how little focus they've had on the often on the actual construction and how much focus they've had on the zoning reform. So they have gone through this uh, idea. They push this idea. I don't know if this is as prevalent in New York, but of legalized housing. That's what they legalize apartments. That's what they say. Because the idea they try to frame their rezoning of places that are zoned for single family homes as as legalizing apartments. So they did a lot of narrative work on that. But they have pushed for zoning reform since, for the last decade. And they have gotten a lot of traction. One of the dynamics here that I know is similar in New York is are at the state level, in contrast to the local level, the real estate industry has tremendous control. And so what they found was that a lot of their rezoning work could be done that was rejected at the local level could be done through state mandates. And they found very willing and eager politicians these are politicians who have been opponents of rent control, Democrats and Republicans, opponents of rent control, opponents of tenant protections, opponents of extending notice periods for tenants to respond in eviction processes, like you name it. The real estate Democrats are a major bloc in Sacramento. So the YIMBY movement quickly went from its failures to adopt zoning reforms locally to going to the state level where the real estate industry really dominates both the Democratic and Republican parties and successfully pushing legislation. And that's really where they made their mark in California was through state legislation led by folks like State Senator from San Francisco, Scott Wiener, who's a big YIMBY, and has pushed these kind of rezoning mandates. But again, they also fight back. It's very strange. They also fight back against things like some people want use it or lose it type provisions. In other words, if you're going to upzone this and you say you want to build, okay, but you lose that right if you don't build within a certain number of years, right? They'll fight against anything like that. So there's this weird thing where they're very committed to upzoning, but they're all over the map when it comes to like actually getting anything built. And that's what's so strange in California. But anyway, that's in terms of history of rezoning, it's a lot of it's been led at the through the state legislature.
It's good that you brought up the rezoning because in New York City is also heavy battleground. I think we touched on a little bit. I think early on, I think in Jihei's presentation. But I wonder also, Jihei, if you want to also expand on how the community also have been trying to use the rezoning.
Yeah, I can say a few words about that. Yeah, our community has been pushing for a community-led rezoning plan for many years now. It's called the Chinatown Working Group Plan, but if anyone's familiar with New York City geography, it encompasses a much larger part than just Chinatown, and that's because this neighborhood, this like more working class neighborhood, was excluded from protective rezoning that actually stops the ability for luxury towers to be built in another more like whiter middle class neighborhood. And so our community has been fighting to get those same protections and better ones that actually incentivize 100% low income housing that's affordable to the people that live here, stopping these height caps, putting in height caps to stop these towers from being built. I think Sarah, kind of demonstrated this a little bit, which is that, if a landlord, if the developer can't build a luxury tower, right, then it's much harder for them to raise the rents in the neighborhood because we see, like they get the high rents when they can sell like a 50-story penthouse with river views. So if you take away their ability to make that penthouse happen, suddenly they can't, charge quite as much. So we've been fighting for this rezoning plan. Councilmember Marte really ran on 2021 specifically on passing this plan. I would say, our well, I could speak a lot about it, so I'm going to try not to. But if folks are curious, they can definitely reach out to YAD, and we'll happy to share more. But just to say, I think in a really long term, we see that this community-led rezonings could be a tool that other communities could also take up, and to stop YIMBYs, and it really challenges them directly because they hate that. They hate any restriction on zoning, and but when it comes from the context of, which is silly because they've been rezoning like crazy as developers for the past 20 years here in New York City, and then suddenly it's the community doing it and they're against it. So just to say, I think that can also really highlight and expose the false progressivism too. If there are communities really strong coming out and being like, "This is what we want," you gonna stand against us, or are you gonna stand against us or with us, right? So just to say.
I would also just want to add one thing. Like I think the zoning fights are often, for the YIMBYs, they're just dividing issue. Like they're just trying to provoke opposition and frame anything, even the slightest request for anything, as being anti-housing, to have an issue to kind of pummel people on it. And I just want to share this one example because I think sometimes there's a tendency to think like people want to find like, is there something that would sort of be acceptable, right, to everyone? I just want to say like when I took office in 2020, there was like it was called the Hub in San Francisco, very dense transit friendly area, but with a bunch of undeveloped sites. And there was this multi-year rezoning process, and basically it came to me of this, big like rezoning 18 sites and total giveaway and upzoning. And we worked with like all these like actual community organizations and led some amendments where we ended up like getting more affordability, green lighting a few major projects that were in the pipeline, right? And getting the purchase of a site, which is a major site for the Mission District here, which had been a multi-year battle for 100% affordable housing. Like we put together what was not only a deal that the community groups were fine with, but even the developers were fine with it, right? So you would think this would be like if people were acting actually in good faith and just trying to say like, let's bring everyone to the table, hash through it. This was a very complicated deal. It did green light a few, big buildings that, but it had more affordability, like I said, and the other side. So it was one of those like, no one was like thrilled about it, but it was actually an example of like, okay, all stakeholders here, let's hammer something out that um, and like none of that matters. That the reason I mention it is like for the YIMBY folks exist to take something like that, and all they focused on was the sites that couldn't, like we basically delayed the rest of the sites where there was no proposal for development at all. We said, let's take those sites out of this legislation. Let's not upzone them yet. Let's do a race and equity study and have like community groups involved and look at the impacts of development of those sites. The YIMBYs, that's all they focused on. Literally sites that no one was proposing to develop. The market wasn't even ready to develop them. And there was just like, there was literally no housing delayed, but they seized that and used it nonstop to attack progressives, right? Even where the developers were at the table and fine with the deal because none of them were ready to develop those other sites anyway. So it's just an example of like how the zoning stuff is used as like this wedge issue and political fight, even when it doesn't have an impact on what does or doesn't get built.
Thank you, Dean, for your comments. You also remind me of something similar happened here in the Lower East Side, where there was a site, public sites that the community has been demanding to build 100% low income on the Silver Park, and actually got a developer to actually want to do it. But the council member at the time, her name is Margaret Chin, who was very pro-developer, even refused to meet with the developer. Because she knows that if she allowed this to happen, that will open up the floodgate, because that will make it possible that people know that, oh, actually they can do it. The developer can actually do 100% low income. Then it will actually open up the imagination. But I think the people, really, organize, for 100% low income housing. And now, with, a council member here in the Lower East Side, Chris Marte, actually have been able to put in 100%, affordable housing, low income housing on the different sites. And as he's running for the next term, he also promised, to do more on that, which I think leads to the end, of our events. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Just a reminder, I think some speakers in the panel mentioned about some of the next steps, and I'm going to just share the screen here. So if you are, in New York City, please, wherever you are, District 1 best. If not, it's okay. To volunteer, to support Chris Marte's re-election as multiple speaker, and people in the comment touched on earlier that this is a very important fight that goes way beyond just District 1. It has a big implication, as people also say that now the developers have been crazily putting out ads every day against him. But if you come to the community and get in touch with people here, then you will see how much support he's actually getting, and we want him to win big, to send a very strong and powerful message to the big real estate that he has people's back. So you can scan the QR code to sign up, or go to the website below, wolmarte.com. And then on the right side is that's for people across the nation. As long as you're a citizen or green card holder, you can make a donation to the No More 24 PAC to support the efforts to let Chris to become the speaker, which is the head of the city council, who will dictate or have the power to decide, the city, the whole New York City, what gets to be built and what kind of agenda, whether it's pro-developer or the people first. As the current speaker has been very bad, to say the very least, who have been really like pro-developer and really supporting the sweatshop and exploitation of the most vulnerable workers in New York City. So if we make Chris the speaker, then we'll drastically change the whole situation, and we'll also send a very strong message nationwide that even in the belly of the beast, in the most pro real estate, the New York City like to call itself the real estate capital of the world. If we can win here, then I think we'll have nationwide impacts to help people across the country to fight against the YIMBY, because now we know that, hey, this is one successful example that shows that if the people come together, then we can win. And if we can do it here in New York City, we can do it anywhere else, in the US. So please, make a donation and spread the word, and urge your friends and family in the US to do the same thing. Scan the QR code or go to the website, nomore24pack.com. Last but not least, please stay in touch. Feel free to reach out, to any of us. Feel free to, share your thoughts, questions, and I think this is a good start. And please stay in touch. And we will, see you another time, or see you in action in the streets, or on social media, or anywhere else you can reach us. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good night.